The first thing Ben Sterling saw was the blood. It was a splash of impossible crimson against the pale gold of the hay in his barn. A deep, dark stain that didn't belong. His heart, a steady, lonely drum in the quiet of his isolated ranch, suddenly hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He'd come in from the afternoon sun, the dusty air thick with the smell of dry timber and animals. And there it was, a body, a person, lying in the gloom of the hayloft. For a second he froze. Out here a stranger meant trouble. Always. He squinted, his hand going instinctively to the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip. He saw a fall of raven black hair, splayed out like spilled ink. Then a slim figure in worn buckskin, a woman, and she was hurt, badly. He hadn't spoken to another living soul in almost 3 months. His world was fences, cattle, and the mournful whisper of the wind. A world he'd built brick by lonely brick to keep the past out. And now this. The past, the violence, the world of men. It had just kicked his door in. He took a step closer, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The woman didn't move. He could see the ragged rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. For now. He knelt beside her, the smell of blood sharp in his nostrils. She was Comanche. He could tell by the beadwork on her buckskin, the sharp, proud line of her cheekbones. There was a nasty gash on her arm, crudely bandaged. But that wasn't the worst of it. A dark, ugly stain was spreading across her side. A gunshot wound. Festering. He reached out a calloused hand, meaning only to check for fever. But as his fingers brushed her forehead, her eyes snapped open. They were wild, dark, and filled with a terror so pure, it was like looking into the eyes of a cornered wolf. She expected a killing blow. And in that moment, something inside Ben Sterling, something he thought had died with his wife and son, broke wide open. All thought of risk, of the trouble she would bring, it all just evaporated. He couldn't leave her here to die. He just couldn't. But as he gently gathered her into his arms, her body light as a bird, he felt something hard and angular tucked into her belt. He pulled it free. It wasn't a knife. It wasn't a weapon. It was a rock, a geode, split in half. And deep inside its crystalline heart, something was glowing with a soft, unnatural light. He stared at it, the faint blue light pulsing in his dusty barn like a second, secret heartbeat. This woman hadn't just brought trouble to his doorstep. She'd brought a mystery, and Ben Sterling was about to find out that some mysteries are better left buried. He carried her to the cabin, the strange, glowing stone heavy in his pocket. He laid her on his own cot, the small, Spartan room suddenly feeling charged, alive. For years, this place had been a tomb, a monument to what he'd lost. Now it was a sick room, a sanctuary, and maybe a target. Her skin was on fire. He worked with a grim focus, pushing back the storm of questions in his mind. He boiled water, tore strips from one of his few clean shirts for bandages. He cleaned the wound in her side, his touch surprisingly gentle. It was bad, angry, infected. Whoever shot her had left her to die a slow, painful death. He saw other marks too, the faint, yellowing ghosts of old bruises on her arms, the hard, defensive set of her jaw, even in unconsciousness. This woman was a fighter. She'd been fighting for a long, long time. For 3 days, his world shrank to the size of that cabin, her feverish murmurs in a language he didn't understand, the constant task of forcing sips of water and thin broth between her cracked lips. He sat vigil, his Winchester rifle always within arm's reach. The solitude he'd once craved now felt like a gaping vulnerability. Every time a coyote howled, he was at the window. Every time the wind rattled the door, his hand was on his rifle. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. He was a guardian, a sentry, and in his pocket the strange geode seemed to pulse in time with her ragged breaths. He'd take it out in the dead of night, watching the unholy blue light cast dancing shadows on the log walls. It felt ancient, powerful, and dangerous. On the 4th day, the fever broke. She woke up, her eyes clear and sharp. The terror was gone, replaced by a wary, unnerving intensity. She watched his every move, her gaze missing nothing. She was like a hawk, studying him, judging him. He didn't know what to say. He just pointed to his chest. Ben. She watched him for a long moment, then her voice, a dry rasp, whispered a single word. Naru. It was a start, a fragile bridge between two worlds. But as her strength returned, so did her secrets. He'd find her staring out the window, a look of profound dread on her face. He'd catch her tracing patterns in the dust on the floor, patterns that looked like maps, and she never, ever asked about the glowing stone he'd taken from her. It was a silent, unspoken question hanging between them. One afternoon, he came back from checking his fence line and found her standing by the hearth, her back to him. She was holding a piece of charcoal, and on the rough wooden mantel she'd drawn a symbol, a circle with a jagged line like a lightning bolt cutting through it. He'd seen that symbol before, years ago, burned into the side of a supply wagon, the mark of a man he had hoped to never cross paths with again, a man whose cruelty was the stuff of dark legend among the Army Scouts. Captain Malachi Brand. He felt a cold dread snake its way up his spine. He turned to face her, his voice low. "Where did you see that?" Naru's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw not just fear, but a flicker of something else. Defiance. She didn't answer him. Instead, she walked to the cabin door and pointed. Out on the ridge overlooking his valley, two riders sat on their horses. They were just tiny specks against the vast blue sky. But Ben didn't need a spyglass to feel their menace. They were watching, waiting. She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "They are not bandits. They are hunters." Ben's blood ran cold. The hunters had found their prey, and his quiet, lonely ranch had just become the hunting ground. He realized with sickening certainty that he had completely misunderstood the situation. He thought he was helping a victim of a random shooting, but the symbol on his mantle, the disciplined stillness of the riders on the ridge, the glowing stone hidden in his chest, it all told a different story. This wasn't random. This was a deliberate, organized pursuit. And Naru wasn't just a victim. She was a fugitive. "Who is he?" Ben asked, his voice flat, his eyes never leaving the riders. "The man who uses that mark." Naru hesitated. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the deep-seated mistrust warring with her desperate need for an ally. "He is a ghost," she said finally, "a devil who wears a soldier's coat. He hunts my people. He wants what I carry." "The stone," Ben said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, a single sharp movement. "It is the key." The key to what? But she wouldn't say more. The walls went back up, her face becoming an unreadable mask. Ben knew he was only getting part of the story, a small, carefully selected piece of the truth. And the pieces he didn't have were probably the ones that were going to get him killed. The riders on the ridge disappeared as the sun began to set, but their presence lingered like a poison in the air. The fragile piece of the valley was shattered. That night a different kind of fever gripped the cabin, a fever of tension, of unspoken words and shared danger. He didn't sleep. He sat in his chair by the door, rifle across his lap, watching the shadows dance. He was an Army scout again, the man he'd tried to bury under years of solitude. The instincts were all coming back, sharp and unwelcome. The ability to hear a twig snap from 100 yards away. The knowledge of how to move without a sound. The cold, hard calculus of a firefight. He remembered Captain Brand, a man who enjoyed his work too much, a man who saw cruelty not as a means to an end, but as a reward in itself. Ben had served under him for 6 hellish months, culminating in an action against a peaceful Cheyenne village that the official reports called a battle, but Ben knew was a slaughter. He'd walked away from the Army the next day, the screams of women and children echoing in his soul. And now Brand's symbol was scrawled on his fireplace. The next morning the riders were back, 4 of them this time. They didn't stay on the ridge. They came down into the valley, moving with a slow, arrogant confidence. They weren't hiding, they were making a statement. Ben met them on the porch, his Winchester held loosely at his side. Naru was inside, hidden, the heavy bar drawn across the door. The leader was a tall man with cold, pale eyes and a neatly trimmed beard that did nothing to soften the predatory cruelty in his face. It was him, Malachi Brand. He looked older, but the same chilling emptiness was in his eyes. "Afternoon," Brand said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Captain Malachi Brand. We're tracking a fugitive, a Comanche thief. Seen anyone pass through here?" Ben's face was a granite mask. "Just me. Been quiet." Brand's gaze swept over the small cabin, the well-tended fences, the sturdy barn. His eyes missed nothing. "This one, she's wounded, caused a great deal of trouble, stole something of great value." His eyes flicked past Ben, trying to pierce the gloom of the cabin's single window. Beside Brand sat a man whose face was a roadmap of violence. A vicious scar cleaved his left cheek from eye to jawline. Ben recognized him too. Cutter, Brand's loyal dog, the one who always did the dirtiest work. The scar was new, but the pig-like eyes were the same. Those were the eyes Ben remembered from the Cheyenne village, gleaming with bloodlust. Cutter spat a stream of tobacco juice, the brown glob landing dangerously close to Ben's boot. "She's slippery, that one, but the captain always gets what he's after." Ben's hand tightened on his rifle. The urge to raise it, to end this right here, was a physical force he had to fight to control. "This is my land," he said, his voice a low growl. "And I said, I haven't seen her." Brand smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "A man alone out here. It's a hard life. Easy for a man to simply disappear." The threat hung in the air, thick and heavy. "We'll just have a look around your property, for trespassers." "Look all you want," Ben bit out, "but you stay out of my cabin, and my barn." Brand held his gaze for a long, tense moment. A silent battle of wills fought in the dusty yard. Then he gave a curt nod. "As you wish, rancher. For now." They rode off, fanning out, their search a deliberate, insulting violation of his space. Ben stood there, his knuckles white on the stock of his rifle, a cold fury coiling in his gut. He had let them walk away. For now. He knew this wasn't over. This was a game to Brand, a hunt, and the game had just begun. When he went back inside, Naru was standing by the window, her face pale. She had heard everything. "He will not stop," she whispered. "I know," Ben said. He looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, but also the unbending steel beneath it. He still didn't have the whole truth from her. She was still holding back, protecting her secrets. But it didn't matter. He had seen Brand's face. He had seen Cutter's scar. And the choice was no longer his to make. His past had come calling. And this time, he wasn't going to walk away. The debt he owed the dead from that Cheyenne village was about to be paid, right here in this quiet little valley. The next few days were a quiet, nerve-shredding prelude to war. Brand and his men were gone, but they weren't. Their presence was a constant, invisible pressure. Ben found tracks every morning, signs that they were circling, watching, testing his perimeter. They were professionals, patient, like wolves waiting for the deer to let its guard down. He and Naru fell into a tense, unspoken partnership. He spent his days fortifying the ranch, turning his home into a defensible position. He reinforced the cabin door, boarded up the back window, created firing positions in the barn loft. He was all grim efficiency, his movements economical, his face set in hard lines. The scout was fully awake now, and the rancher was gone. Naru, in turn, revealed a different side of herself. Her strength returned with surprising speed. She moved with a silent, fluid grace. She knew the land in a way he didn't. She showed him how to use crushed leaves and mud to blend into the shadows, how to read the subtle shifts in the wind that could carry the scent of an enemy from a mile away. She was a warrior, but the wall of secrecy between them remained. One evening, he was cleaning his rifle by the firelight, the metallic click and slide of the mechanism the only sound in the cabin. Naru was stitching a tear in her buckskin tunic, her fingers nimble and sure. "The stone," Ben said without looking up. "He called it valuable. You called it a key. What does it open?" She stopped sewing. He could feel her eyes on him. "A door," she said softly, "to a place he must never find." "What place?" She looked into the fire, her expression distant, her face etched with a grief so profound it seemed to steal the air from the room. "My home, a place of peace, the sunken canyon. She paused. Bran believes it is filled with gold. He calls it El Dorado. He is wrong. Then what's in it? Ben pressed. Life, she whispered. A place hidden from the world of men like him. My people. We were thought to be gone, wiped out. But some of us survived. We found this place. We have lived there in secret for generations. Suddenly it all clicked into place. Bran wasn't just hunting for treasure, he was hunting for people. The massacre at the Cheyenne village wasn't a one-time atrocity, it was his trade. He was an exterminator. He found our hunting trail by accident, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. He captured my father and my brother. He tortured them. They told him nothing. They died protecting the secret. I was the only one who escaped. Ben felt a cold, familiar rage rise in his chest, the same helpless fury he'd felt all those years ago. But this time was different. He wasn't a soldier following orders. He was a free man on his own land, and the line had been drawn. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a fugitive, but the last guardian of a hidden world. The weight she carried was immense. He finally understood why she hadn't trusted him, why she'd held her secret so close. She was protecting the last remnants of her entire culture. But even as he felt a new wave of respect for her, a nagging doubt remained. Her story was powerful, emotional, and maybe a little too perfect. The scout in him, the part that had learned to distrust everything and everyone to stay alive, couldn't shake a single chilling question. If her home was so perfectly hidden, how had Bran's men tracked her so easily to his remote, isolated ranch? It didn't add up. Someone had to be guiding them. The very next day he got his answer, and it was worse than he could have imagined. He was out on the North Ridge, checking the perimeter, when he found it. A single broken arrow shaft, half buried in the dirt. It wasn't one of Bran's. The fletching was Comanche, but it wasn't Naru's style either. The markings were different. It was a message marker, an arrow deliberately left behind to signal a direction to a follower. He followed the direction it pointed, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm of dread. A few hundred yards away, tucked into a small hidden ravine, was a cold campsite. Not Bran's men. The tracks were moccasins, a single rider. And in the dead embers of the fire pit, he found a small, discarded pouch. Inside was a piece of jerky and a single silver dollar. U.S. Army issue. Payment. Naru hadn't been tracked. She'd been betrayed. Someone from her own people was working with Brand. A traitor. A ghost who could walk the same paths, read the same signs, and anticipate her every move. This changed everything. They weren't just fighting Brand and his thugs. They were fighting an enemy who knew Naru's mind, who knew her secrets. An enemy who was already inside their defenses. He walked back to the cabin, the silver dollar cold and heavy in his palm. The world seemed to shrink, the valley suddenly feeling like a cage. He now understood the full, terrifying scope of their situation. Naru wasn't just running from a monster. She was running from a ghost at her back, a traitor from within her own family. When he entered the cabin, Naru was sharpening a small skinning knife, her movements precise and focused. She looked up, her eyes questioning. He opened his hand and showed her the silver dollar. He didn't have to say a word. The color drained from her face. Her composure, the warrior's mask she wore so well, shattered into a million pieces. He saw a flash of pure, soul-crushing anguish in her eyes, a pain deeper than any gunshot wound. Kyle, she breathed, the name a poisoned whisper. My cousin. The betrayal was so profound, it left no room for rage, only a hollow, aching emptiness. Kyle, the boy she had grown up with, the man who had survived the first attack with her, only to sell her out, to sell out their entire people, for a handful of silver. He believes Brand will let him live, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. He thinks there can be a deal with a snake. He is a fool, a dead man walking. Now Ben understood. The hunt wasn't just relentless, it was personal. It was a family tragedy playing out on a bloody stage, and his ranch was ground zero. The enemy wasn't just outside the gates, the enemy was in Naru's heart, a wound of betrayal that cut deeper than any blade. That night the attack came. It wasn't the full frontal assault Ben expected. It was surgical, cunning, guided by Cale's intimate knowledge. They didn't come for the cabin, they came for the water. Under the cover of a moonless sky, two of Brand's men crept down to the creek that was Ben's only source of fresh water. They carried heavy sacks. Ben watched from the barn loft, his rifle steady, his scout's eyes piercing the darkness. He saw them tip the sacks into the creek, a pale powder clouding the water. Poison. They weren't just trying to kill him and Naru. They were trying to make the land itself uninhabitable, to flush them out. It was a move of pure, calculated cruelty, a move that had Brand's signature all over it, but Cale's tactical guidance behind it. Ben didn't fire. An open fight was what they wanted. Instead, he watched them retreat, his mind racing. The creek was tainted. They had maybe a day's worth of water stored in the cabin. The clock was now ticking. He slipped back to the cabin and told Naru. She didn't flinch. The news of Cale's betrayal had burned away her fear, leaving behind something cold and hard as obsidian. "There is a spring," she said, "half a day's walk east of here, hidden in the rocks. He does not know of it. My grandmother showed only me." It was a risk, a huge one, leaving the relative safety of the fortified ranch to venture out into open country where Brand's men were waiting. But they had no choice. Die of thirst or walk into the trap. "It's what they want," Ben said. "They'll be waiting." "I know," she replied, her eyes meeting his in the dim light. "And we will be waiting for them." For the first time, a plan began to form. A desperate, dangerous plan. They wouldn't just defend. They would attack. They would use Cale's own knowledge against him. He would expect them to go to the spring. He would set a trap there. But he wouldn't expect them to be the hunters. The next morning, at the first hint of dawn, they made their move. They packed light, 2 canteens, their weapons, and the glowing geode which Naru now carried in a pouch around her neck. They slipped out the back of the barn, moving like ghosts into the pre-dawn mist. They didn't head straight for the spring. Naru led them on a winding, circuitous route, through thickets and gullies Ben never knew existed. She was using what she called ghost paths, trails that left almost no sign, known only to her people. After an hour, she stopped. She held up a hand, listening. Ben listened too, straining his ears. Nothing but the wind. "He is close," she whispered. "He is following the path he thinks I will take." She pointed to a narrow, rocky canyon up ahead. "The spring is through there. Kyle will expect us to walk into the canyon. The trap will be at the other end." "So we go around," Ben said. A faint, grim smile touched her lips. "No, we go in, but we do not go through." She led him up the steep side of the canyon wall, a difficult, treacherous climb. From the top, they could look down into the narrow passage below. It was a perfect ambush site, a shooting gallery. And there they were. 4 of Brand's men, including the scarred brute, Cutter, nestled among the rocks at the far end, their rifles trained on the canyon entrance. They were waiting, patient, confident. But Naru wasn't looking at them. She was looking at a small outcrop of rock on the opposite canyon wall, slightly behind the ambushers. Ben saw nothing. "Kyle is there," she breathed, her voice tight with a mix of hatred and sorrow. "He watches, to make sure we do not turn back." Ben raised his rifle, resting the barrel on a flat rock. The distance was extreme, almost impossible. But he was a patient man. He settled in, controlled his breathing, and lined up his sights on Cutter. That scar was a perfect target. "Naru," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Your cousin is yours. But Cutter is mine." Her eyes blazed. She knocked an arrow, her movements swift and silent. She wasn't aiming for the ambushers below. She was aiming across the canyon, at the empty-looking rocks where a traitor was hiding. The quiet valley was about to erupt in violence. They were outnumbered 6-2. The trap was set, but the prey had just become the predators, and a storm of blood and reckoning was about to break over the sunken canyon's secret keepers. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. Down below, Cutter shifted his weight, bored, spitting another stream of tobacco. He had no idea he was already a dead man. Ben centered the crosshairs on the jagged line of Cutter's scar. He took a breath, let half of it out, and his world narrowed to the trigger. Beside him, Naru was perfectly still, a statue carved from vengeance. Her bow was drawn, the arrow aimed not at the men below, but at the place where her heart had been broken, at Kale. Now, Ben breathed. Two sounds split the morning air, so close together they were almost one. The sharp crack of Ben's Winchester and the vicious thwump of Naru's bowstring. Down below, Cutter's head snapped back as if pulled by an invisible string. He crumpled without a sound, a neat dark hole appearing exactly where his scar had been. For a fraction of a second, the other three men stared in stunned confusion. Across the canyon, a scream of pain and surprise echoed from the rocks. Naru's arrow had found its mark. A figure, Kyle, stumbled out from behind the outcrop, clutching his shoulder, the arrow shaft protruding from it. His face was a mask of shock and betrayal. He had thought he was the hunter, the puppet master. He never imagined she would find him. That's when chaos erupted in the canyon below. The three remaining ambushers, realizing they were the ones in the trap, started firing wildly up at the canyon rim. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around Ben and Naru, whining like angry hornets. But Ben was already moving, sliding down a shale slope to a new position. He fired again. One of the men spun around and fell. Two left. Naru was a ghost. She was no longer beside him. He saw a flicker of movement on the rim further down. An arrow hissed through the air. Another man screamed, an arrow buried deep in his chest. One left. The last man, panicking, broke cover and made a desperate run back the way he'd come. It was a fatal mistake. Ben's rifle barked one last time. The man pitched forward into the dust and lay still. Silence. The entire firefight had lasted less than 30 seconds. Ben scrambled back to their original position. Naru was there, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a righteous fire. She was staring across the canyon. Cal was gone. A trail of blood stained the rocks where he had been. He was wounded, but he had escaped. "He's running back to Brand," Ben said, reloading his rifle with steady hands. "Let him," Naru said, her voice like ice. "Let the snake run back to his master. He will lead him to us, and we will be ready." They didn't go to the spring. They didn't need to. The point had been made. They were no longer hiding, no longer defending. They were on the offensive. They circled back to the ranch using the ghost paths, their senses on high alert. The valley felt different now. It was their territory, and they had just spilled blood to prove it. When they reached the cabin, the full weight of what they had done settled upon them. They had killed 4 men. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. But there was no regret. Not in Ben's eyes and not in Naru's. There was only a grim, cold resolve. That night they finally spoke of the future. Not of a peaceful life, but of the war that was to come. "He'll bring everyone now," Ben said, cleaning his rifle again, the familiar ritual a comfort in the tense quiet. "Bran won't be turned back by losing a few men. His pride won't allow it. He'll come to burn us out." "We cannot stay here," Naru said. She was tending to her bow, checking the string, testing its pull. "The cabin is a trap. He will surround it. We will die." "You're right," Ben agreed. "Fighting here was never the plan. Holding this place was just for buying time." She looked at him, a question in her eyes. "Time for what?" He walked to the rough-hewn table and unrolled an old yellowed piece of parchment. It was a topographical map of the region, something he'd kept from his army days. It was incredibly detailed, showing every canyon, every creek bed, every ridge line for 50 miles in every direction. "Your sunken canyon," he said, his finger tapping the map. "You said it was hidden. But everything leaves a sign. Water flows downhill. Rock formations follow a pattern. It's on this map. You just have to know how to read it." He pointed to a complex, almost inaccessible series of intersecting canyons, a place marked on the map with a single word: Badlands. "It's here, isn't it?" he asked. "The entrance." Naru stared at the map, her eyes wide with disbelief. She traced the lines with her finger, her expression a mixture of shock and dawning respect. "How?" "I was a scout," he said simply. "It was my job to find places that didn't want to be found." He then pointed to a specific narrow passage that led into the heart of the Badlands, a place he called the Needle's Eye. This is the only way in for a large group of men on horseback. A natural bottleneck. If we can get there before him, we can hold off an army. A new plan began to take shape. A desperate, audacious gamble. They would abandon the ranch. They would lead Brand on a chase straight into the heart of the wilderness they knew, and he didn't. They would make their stand not at the cabin, but at the gateway to Naru's home. They would turn the entire landscape into a weapon. But as they finalized their strategy, a new chilling thought entered Ben's mind. Kyle. He was still out there. He knew the land as well as Naru. He would know about the Needle's Eye. He would warn Brand. Their plan had a fatal flaw. A traitor who could anticipate their every move. Naru seemed to read his mind. Kyle will not expect us to go there, she said, her voice hardening. It is too sacred. To lead enemies so close to the sunken canyon, it is unthinkable to him. He will believe we are running in the opposite direction, to the mountains. His pride will blind him. Ben looked at her, at the certainty in her eyes. He had to trust her. He had to trust her knowledge of her enemy, of her own blood. They left that very night. They took only what they could carry: weapons, ammunition, a little food, and the glowing geode that had started it all. Ben paused at the door of his cabin, the home he had built with his own hands, the place where he had intended to live out the rest of his lonely days. He gave it one last look, then turned his back on it and walked away without a second thought. That life was over. As they melted into the darkness, Naru leading the way, Ben felt a profound shift inside him. The grief for his wife and son, the heavy shroud he had worn for so long, was still there. But it was no longer the only thing. A new feeling was pushing through it, a fierce, protective fire, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a decade. He wasn't just helping Naru now. He was fighting for her people, and for the part of his own soul that Malachi Brand had tried to kill all those years ago. The journey to the Needle's Eye was a grueling, 2-day trek through some of the most unforgiving country Ben had ever seen. Naru moved with a tireless, unerring certainty, guiding them through a landscape that would have killed a lesser man. Ben, the seasoned scout, found himself in the unfamiliar role of the student, humbled by her intimate connection to the land. She taught him which plants held water, how to read the stories left in the dust by the passing of a snake or a lizard. He, in turn, taught her how to conserve her energy, how to field strip his Winchester in the dark, how to think like a soldier. They were no longer two individuals. They were a single, cohesive fighting unit. They spoke little, but the silence between them was no longer tense. It was comfortable, filled with a deep, unspoken understanding. He found himself watching the way the wind caught her hair, the determined set of her jaw, the moments when her guard would drop and a flicker of a smile would touch her lips. He was drawn not just to her strength, but to the unbroken spirit that blazed within her. On the evening of the second day, they reached their destination. The Needle's Eye was even more formidable than the map had suggested. It was a narrow slit in a towering wall of red rock, barely wide enough for 2 horses to pass abreast. The canyon walls rose 100 feet straight up on either side, sheer and unclimbable. It was the perfect defensive position, a death trap. He will come, Naru said, her voice echoing in the vast rocky amphitheater. Kyle will have seen our trail by now. He will know I lied. We'll be ready, Ben said. He surveyed the canyon, his tactical mind already at work. He pointed to a high ledge, accessible only by a difficult climb. I'll take that position. I'll have a clear line of fire down the entire approach. You take the rocks near the entrance. Create a crossfire. They set to work, preparing their ambush. They gathered loose rocks to create small fortifications. They found the best angles, the clearest fields of fire. They were 2 small figures against a vast, indifferent landscape, preparing to face down an army. As dust settled, casting long, purple shadows across the canyon floor, Naru touched Ben's arm. Ben, she said, her voice soft, before they come, I want you to know. The sunken canyon is not what Brand thinks. The life I spoke of, it is not just my people. She reached into her pouch and pulled out the geode. In the fading light, its inner glow seemed stronger, pulsing with a gentle, blue-green luminescence. This canyon, the earth is different there. It heals. The water flows with life. Plants grow there that grow nowhere else on earth. They can cure sickness, mend wounds, stop poisons. She looked down at the fading scar on her side. It is why I healed so quickly. The poultice my father used before he died. It was from the canyon. Ben stared at her, speechless. It wasn't gold. It was something infinitely more valuable. A secret that could change the world. A miracle hidden in the heart of the desert. And Bran wanted to strip it bare, to destroy it for profit. The stakes of this fight had just become monumental. It wasn't just about saving a village anymore. It was about protecting a sacred trust. "Why tell me now?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Because if we die here tomorrow," she said, her dark eyes locking with his, "I want someone else in this world to have known the truth." She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, her grip strong. "You are a good man, Ben Sterling. You fight for ghosts, for people you do not know. My people would call you a warrior of the heart." In that moment, standing at the precipice of a battle they would likely not survive, the last wall around Ben's own heart crumbled to dust. He looked at this fierce, beautiful woman, this guardian of miracles, and realized he would not just die for her. He would kill for her. He lifted her hand and pressed it to his lips, a gesture so foreign to him, so out of character for the gruff, solitary man he had been, that it surprised them both. "Then let's show them what happens when they hunt a warrior's heart," he said. The sun had barely kissed the horizon when they heard it, the distant thunder of hoofbeats. They were coming. Ben scrambled up to his ledge, his heart a cold, steady hammer in his chest. Naru melted into the rocks below, becoming one with the shadows. The valley fell silent again, holding its breath. Then they appeared, a column of riders, at least 15 of them, with Brand at their head. Kyle was beside him, his arm in a crude sling, his face a thunderous mask of hate. He was pointing toward the Needle's Eye, his betrayal complete. They rode with an arrogant confidence, their guns drawn, expecting to find 2 tired fugitives cornered and ready for slaughter. They rode single file into the narrow passage, the high canyon walls pressing in on them. They were exactly where Ben wanted them. He let the first 5 riders pass his position, letting them get deeper into the trap. Brand, Kyle, and 3 others. Then he looked at Naru's position. He saw the barest flicker of movement, the signal. Ben lined up his sights on the last man in the column, the one furthest from the entrance. He fired. The man toppled from his saddle. The echo of the shot boomed through the canyon like a cannon blast. Panic erupted. The riders were trapped, packed together, a perfect target. Before they could even figure out where the shot had come from, an arrow hissed from the rocks at the entrance. The lead rider, the one just behind Brand, jerked and fell, the arrow sprouting from his throat. The crossfire had begun. Ben worked the lever of his Winchester, firing with a cold, devastating precision. A second man fell. A third. Horses screamed and reared, their riders fighting for control. They were firing wildly, their bullets sparking uselessly against the massive rock walls. Below, Naru was a whirlwind of death. She moved from rock to rock, never in the same place twice. An arrow would appear from one shadow, find its mark, and then another would fly from a different direction. She was a phantom, her arrows striking with supernatural accuracy. Brand, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage, was screaming orders. "It's the rancher! On the ledge! Get him!" Several of his men dismounted, trying to find cover, trying to get a clear shot at Ben's perch. But the angle was too steep. Ben was protected, raining down death from above. He saw Kale, the traitor, his face pale with terror. He wasn't a fighter. He was a snake. He scrambled from his horse and tried to crawl behind a boulder, trying to escape the carnage he had unleashed. But Naru had not forgotten him. She rose from behind a rock, not 20 yards from him. Her eyes met her cousin's. For a moment, time seemed to stop. In his eyes, she saw fear, regret, and the pathetic plea of a coward. In hers, he saw only the cold, hard face of justice. She drew her knife. Kyle fumbled for his own pistol, his good hand shaking. He was too slow. She was on him in a flash, a blur of righteous fury. The fight was short, brutal, and personal. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. When she stepped back, her knife was red. Kyle, the man who had sold his own soul, lay still at her feet. Meanwhile, Ben was dueling with Brand. The captain was a survivor. He'd found cover behind his dead horse and was firing his powerful dragoon pistol up at Ben's ledge with surprising accuracy. Chunks of rock exploded near Ben's head, stinging his face. "You can't hide forever, Scout," Brand roared, his voice echoing with mad fury. "I remember you, the coward who ran from the Cheyenne fight. You've got no stomach for this." "This isn't a fight, Brand," Ben yelled back, reloading. "This is a reckoning." He knew he couldn't stay on the ledge. Brand had him pinned down. He had to move. In a desperate gamble, he pushed off the ledge, sliding and tumbling down a steep rockfall, landing hard on the canyon floor amidst the chaos. He came up firing. He shot one of the remaining men who was turning to face him. He saw another aiming at Naru, who had her back turned after dealing with Kale. Ben's pistol bucked in his hand. The man fell. Now it was just him, Naru, and Brand. Brand stood up from behind his horse, his face a terrifying mix of disbelief and hatred. His private army, his years of planning, all of it was gone, destroyed in minutes by a broken-down rancher and a single Comanche woman. He raised his pistol, aiming it straight at Ben. "You will pay for this," he snarled. But as he fired, Naru's voice cried out, "Ben!" An arrow, her last arrow, flew through the air. It didn't hit Brand's chest or his head. It hit his pistol, the razor-sharp broadhead shattering the firing mechanism a fraction of a second before the hammer fell. The gun exploded in Brand's hand. He screamed, dropping the ruined weapon, staring at his bloody, mangled hand. He was disarmed, defeated. Ben walked slowly towards him, his Winchester leveled. The silence in the canyon was deafening, broken only by Brand's pained gasps. "It's over," Ben said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Brand looked at him, his eyes filled with a venomous, cornered animal hate. He looked at Naru, standing with her bloody knife. He looked at the bodies of his men littering the canyon floor. "You think this is over?" he spat, blood dripping from his lips. "There are others who know the legend, others who will come looking. You haven't won anything. You've only delayed the inevitable." With a final desperate roar, he lunged, not at Ben, but at Naru, his remaining good hand reaching for her throat. He never made it. Ben's rifle shot was not loud. In the vastness of the canyon, it was a small, final punctuation mark. Brand stiffened, a look of profound surprise on his face. He looked down at the dark red stain blooming on his chest, then back at Ben. He opened his mouth to say something, but only a gurgle came out. Then he fell, his body landing in the dust with a grim finality, his dead eyes staring up at the empty blue sky. The war was over. Silence descended, a deep, profound silence that seemed to swallow the echoes of the battle. Ben stood there, the rifle smoke curling from his barrel, his heart pounding in his ears. Naru stood frozen, her chest heaving, the bloody knife still clutched in her hand. They looked at each other across the field of carnage. They were alive. They had won. Slowly, Ben walked over to her. He gently took the knife from her hand, his fingers closing over hers. He looked into her eyes and he saw not a warrior, not a guardian, but the woman who had brought him back to life. He pulled her into his arms and she collapsed against him, the strength that had sustained her for so long finally giving way. She sobbed not for the men they had killed, but for her family, for her cousin, for the life that had been stolen from her. He held her tight, letting his own walls finally fall. Two broken people finding solace in the wreckage. They buried the dead, a grim and necessary task. They buried Cal separately, near the entrance to the canyon, a lonely monument to his betrayal. Then Naru built a small pyre, placing on it the last of her family's medicine bundles. As the smoke curled towards the heavens, she sang a song of mourning, a song of remembrance, and a song of new beginnings. As the last note faded, she turned to Ben. "The sunken canyon," she said. "My people must be told what has happened. They must see who fought for them." She led him through the needle's eye, and then through a hidden passage concealed by a waterfall. They emerged into a place so beautiful it stole Ben's breath. A lush green valley bathed in a soft golden light where waterfalls cascaded down mossy cliffs and the air hummed with a palpable life force. In the center was a small, peaceful village. The people who emerged were not fierce warriors, but gentle healers, artisans, and storytellers. They looked at Ben not with suspicion, but with a profound, quiet gratitude. Naru, their last guardian, had returned, and she had brought a hero with her. Ben Sterling, the man who had sought only solitude, had found a home. The man who had tried to bury his past had found redemption. The man whose heart had been a barren wasteland had found love. He and Naru stood on a cliff overlooking the canyon, hand in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The future was uncertain. The world outside the canyon was still a dangerous place, but here in this hidden sanctuary, they had found peace. A hard-won peace, built on a foundation of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between two people who had found each other in the darkness. Their story was a testament to the fact that even in the most desolate of places, hope can take root, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are not gold or riches, but the secrets of life and the courage of a warrior's heart. This story is a reminder that justice can be found in the forgotten corners of the world, and that one or two good people, standing against the tide, can make all the difference. If you were moved by the story of Ben and Naru, and you want to hear more tales of unlikely heroes and incredible survival, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next.